Well, hey, today we are continuing in our series called Not Too Far, where we're going through the book of Jonah. And the big headline that we're going to see each and every week throughout this series is that no matter how far someone is currently from God, no matter where they've been, no matter what they've done, nobody is too far gone for God's grace and love to reach. And last week we simply started by looking at the first 3 verses of Jonah, and we were really laying the groundwork for this series. And so just to recap Jonah and who he is a prophet of God, living in the 8th century BC, so some 27 to 2800 years ago. And his job as a prophet was to hear from God and then deliver to the people the message that God had for him to deliver. That was his job. Like, hear from God and then deliver the message to the people that God wanted him to deliver. And that was his job. And I wanted to put this map up on the screen again behind me because this map really is a summary of the first 3 verses of Jonah. All right? There's going to be a map that's going to come up here in a second, I think. There might not be a map. There's the map right there. There's the map, all right? And so this map is really the first 3 verses of Jonah, because in Jonah, what we're given is a snapshot of Jonah's life. We're given a snapshot of a short season in Jonah's life where Jonah is asked to do something that he doesn't want to do. And so God's word comes to Jonah and he says, hey, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, which is modern day Mosul, Iraq. That is where Nineveh is. And so he is living in Israel, and God says, hey, I want you to go to Nineveh, which is about 5 to 550 miles away from where Jonah was. And Jonah says, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to Nineveh. And so Jonah runs away from the Lord, and he runs so far by going down to Joppa, which is a port city in Israel, and then he boards a ship and pays the fare to go to Tarshish, which in our best understanding is in modern day Spain. And we kind of joked last week, hey, if you had a choice between going to Iraq or Spain, what would you choose, right? You'd probably choose Spain. And so he chose Spain, but the big headline is he chose to go against what God wanted for him. God said, I want you to go to Nineveh. He said, I'm going to Tarshish. I'm not going to go 500 miles this way. I'm going to actually go 2,000 to 2,500 miles in the opposite direction. He runs away from God. And that's as far as we got last week. Just the first 3 verses. Because the first 3 verses start with a bang. Right? I mean, what we saw last week and what we'll see every week as we go through Jonah is that Jonah, the book of Jonah, really serves like a mirror. It serves as a mirror in your life and my life. And when you put your life up against the life of Jonah, what you realize is that you actually can empathize a lot with Jonah. You know why? Because especially last week what we saw is that we all have been or are currently Jonah. We've all run from God. Because running from God is simply going in the opposite direction that God tells you to go. And when God tells you to do something, when either during a message like this or when you're reading God's word, you're reading the Bible, and you see that God is telling you to do something, if you say no, that's you going in the opposite direction that God said to go. Or when God says, hey, I don't want you to do this, and you say, well, hey, I'm going to do it, that's you going in the opposite direction of God. And if you're like not a believer this morning, or if you are like not from a faith background and you're new to faith, and you're saying, hey, I don't feel like I've ever willfully done that, a good reminder for you and a good reminder for me is anytime we simply decide that we want to live our own way and lead our own life and not have God tell us what to do, even if we don't realize we're doing that, when we say we're going to live life the way we want to, that is you running from God. Because choosing to live life the way that you want to live it and the way that you think is best will never take you in the same direction as God. So you're obviously moving away from him. I didn't say this last week, but there may be some of you this morning that God has called you to do something, like called you to ministry, and you've like ran away from it by saying, I'm not going to do that, that's running from God. Hey, when you prioritize things more than God, when you just say, I'm going to value this thing in my life more than God, that's running from God. Like we've all run from God. And when you run from God, what we saw last week is at least three things happen based on those first three verses. Number one, when you run from God, we saw that you go down. Running from God is a downward spiral. Jonah went down to Joppa, verse 1 says, right? And then he went down into the ship. He boarded the ship. Whenever you run from God, you go down. Whenever you run from God, it's going to cost you. Jonah had to pay the fare to board the ship. All right, it wasn't free. And when you run from God, not only do you go down, but you will have an alternative to God's desire. Jonah boarded a ship. When God asks you to do something, there's going to be what God wants, and there will always be ships in the waiting. And for Jonah, it was a real ship, and he decided to board it. But there's another thing that happens when you run from God, and we're going to see this today. We didn't touch on it last week, and here's what I want you to know. The other thing that happens when you run from God is that your choice to run will always affect other people. When you choose to run from God, your choice to run will always affect other people. When you choose not to do what God says to do, or when you choose to do something that God says not to do, or when you know just within you that you're supposed to do something you don't, when you choose to run from God, it will always affect other people because nothing you do affects only you. Nothing you do affects only you. Your decision, willfully or even innocently, to go against what God wants will always affect other people. I was thinking about this week as I was preparing for this message, and I was reminded of a time in my life when I was younger, quite a bit younger. I was in either late elementary or early middle school. I don't remember the exact age, but we were at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, okay? It's basically Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge on the water, all right? And it's a great place, and so we grew up going there a lot growing up. And this time, I was getting a little bit older, and my dad was like, hey, we're going to go parasailing, which if you've ever been parasailing, it is awesome. It's a lot of fun. And what parasailing is they have a rope tied to the boat on a crank, all right? And they release you because you have got a harness on and it's tethered to you, and there's a parachute behind you. And basically, you're going a couple, 50, 100, 150 feet up in the air. I don't know exactly how high. And they are going to cruise along on the water, and you're just going to go. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be fun. You're going to be able to see things. You're just going to be able to be up high in the wind and on the ocean. And so I was excited to do that. We had never done anything like that before. And just a little bit of backstory too. My family, man, breakfast is one of my favorite meals of the day. And growing up, we always had a big breakfast. I don't know why y'all are making noise right now. I don't know. Like you know where this story's going. I don't know. So had a big breakfast, and we go to get on the boat. And I remember it as clear as day, not exactly the numbers, but I remember that it was 300 and something pound weight limit. And I remember seeing whether it was 300 or 325 or 350, it was 300 something. I remember looking at my dad and looking at myself, and I'm like, I know we are more than that. But this was like back in the day before they weighed you. Before you got on. I guess maybe somebody sued for, public embarrassment or something. I don't know. But regardless, they weren't weighing me and they weren't weighing my dad, but we were clearly over the weight limit. And they didn't ask and we didn't tell. So we get on the boat and they put us in the air, and at first it's awesome. Like you're up there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's going great. And then I'm telling you, out of nowhere, a storm comes up. Like, I cannot make this up. A storm comes up out of nowhere, and immediately they are like yelling to us that they need to pull us in. And we're like, yeah, of course, lightning, we don't want any part of it. Yeah, get us in. Well, here's what happens. They're having a hard time pulling us in. Why are they having a hard time pulling us in? Because we weigh too much, and the storm. And so they're trying to pull us, the wind is trying to push us, and we're over the weight limit. And so we are windshield wipering in the sky, all right? And I think, man, this is great. I look at my dad, and he is not looking so great. All of a sudden, strawberry jam is raining down and getting all over the boat, all over the crew. Spoiler alert, we did make it back to the boat. But the crew was so mad. They were so mad. They were like, you shouldn't have just done that on our boat. And my dad's like, what am I supposed to do when you got to go? It's just coming up and going everywhere. I mean, it was a Red Sea of interesting things. But why do I tell you that? Why do I tell you that story? Because nothing you do affects only you. When you eat a big breakfast and then you get on a ride or you get on a boat and you're beyond the weight limit and a storm comes up, nothing you do affects only you. I mean, they almost lost us. I mean, the tether, it was not looking good. I mean, it was going everywhere. And so nothing you do affects only you. But our decision to go over the weight limit and eat my dad strawberries didn't just affect us, it affected the crew. All right? And here's the thing. While that was not serious, it seemed serious in the moment, but it really wasn't that serious. Things that you and I do in life when we choose to run away from God is almost always more serious than that, right? Being outside of God's will always have consequences. Nothing you do affects only you. If you're married, a decision to disobey and run away from God doesn't just affect you, it affects your spouse. If you have kids, a decision to disobey and run away from God doesn't just affect you, it affects your kids. If you've got friends, a decision to disobey and run away from God doesn't just affect you, it affects your friends. If you've got a job, a decision to disobey and run away from God doesn't just affect you, it affects your coworkers. No matter how introverted you may be or isolated in your life you may feel, nothing you do affects only you. That's why if people say, hey, I can do whatever I want to do with my life, it's my life, I don't affect anybody else, that's a lie. Absolutely what you do affects other people, whether you realize it or not. When you run from God, it impacts other people's lives. So you see where I'm going with this. When Jonah ran from God, he was about to impact other people's lives. Look with me at verse 4, and what we're going to see is that not only did Jonah's decision impact others, funny enough, it also involved a storm. Verse 4. Then the Lord, this is after Jonah has ran and gotten on the ship, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. And such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. So do you see that? Jonah runs from God, and a storm comes up on the sea that was so violent that it threatened the ship's life. The ship was going to break up. The sailors are so afraid that they're having to throw cargo overboard. And here's the thing. These guys that are sailors, that's what they do for a living. So if they're afraid, it's a really bad storm because they do this for a living, so they're used to seeing bad storms. But this must have been a bad storm, so much so that they're throwing cargo overboard to lighten the ship so that they have a better chance of making it. I mean, they feel like their own lives are in danger. And what was the cargo? The cargo represented whatever it was that they were supposed to deliver from Joppa to Tarshish. It was under their care. It was their responsibility to deliver it in whole safely to the port. And so Jonah's decision, he's run from God. The ship that these sailors are responsible for may be lost. The cargo is now lost, and their lives may be lost. Listen, nothing you do affects only you. Nothing Jonah did affected only them. Jonah's choice put the whole crew in danger. And it's so awful, the storm is so scary, that they're calling on their own gods to save them. And notice in the text, it's a lowercase g God, representing that these are not the one true God, but these are the gods of these people. And they're just crying out and calling on their gods. They all had regional gods wherever they were from and whatever religion that they held to. They weren't believers in the Lord, the God of Israel, the God that Jonah knew, but they cry out to their gods. It's a tough situation. Nothing you do affects only you. But here's something else I want you to notice. If you go back to verse 4, I want you to see something. The Lord, we see, sent a great wind. I just want to talk about that for a second. There are always consequences for running from God, and it is sometimes in the form of a storm. And a storm simply represents a situation or a consequence that feels like what Jonah and the crew were experiencing. And storms in our lives happen for one of four reasons, all right? It's either something that we have caused, a direct consequence of our own disobedience and running from God. We experience storms because of choices that others have made. Hello, Jonah and the sailors. They didn't do anything to cause the storm, right? You can experience storms in life because we live in a fallen world. The world is broken, right? Sin has broken the world, and so things just happen that are broken, and storms can happen. Or there are times, like in this situation, where God himself sends the storm. Just like happened here with Jonah. And you might say, well, Matt, why would God send a storm intentionally or allow a storm in my life? Like, that doesn't seem very loving. Well, I want you to know this morning that storms don't come into your life if God is the one sending them because he's against you. They don't come into your life because God is punishing you. It's not because he's out to get you. So the greater question is, if a storm comes and it is due to running from God, why does God allow it? It's because he's allowing you to experience the consequences of disobedience. He doesn't want you to stay comfortable in going against what it is that he has for you. That wouldn't be a good God. But rather, God is gracious and loving, and he knows that when you choose to run away from him and step outside of his will, that is taking you down a wrong path. So he may send a storm. He may allow you to experience a storm to wake you up, to get your attention, to keep you from running further. Because he knows that running from him is where you get hurt. Remember, this series is called Not Too Far because you're not too far. If you're in the room this morning, if you're watching online, I want you to know you're not too far. Jonah, though he had run from God and wanted nothing to do with him even more, was not too far. The storm right here was evidence of God's grace that God wasn't done with Jonah and that God wanted to get Jonah's attention. And grace is simply getting something good that you don't deserve. And Jonah, in this moment, who said, God, I don't want you, who stiff-armed God and ran the other way, did not deserve for God to keep pursuing him, but God loved him so much. God loves you so much that no matter how far you've run, you're not too far for his grace to continue to pursue you. So how does Jonah respond to the storm? That's the question. How's Jonah going to respond? Well, look at verse 5. Let's continue. But Jonah had gone below deck. Isn't that interesting? He already went down to Joppa. He boarded the ship or went down into the ship. Now he's gone lower, because when you run from God, you never go up. You're always going down. But Jonah had gone below deck where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. God is pursuing Jonah, and Jonah is sleeping on God. Jonah has fallen asleep. He's become so numb to God, a storm that is threatening the ship, threatening the cargo, threatening the lives of these sailors. Don't even wake him up. He's down below board, sleeping. God is trying to get his attention with this storm, and he's sleeping on God. You know, you can run from God so long that the storm that maybe he's allowed or that he sends to wake you up doesn't. And you would think, well, I guess God is done with Jonah now, because if he's not even going to wake up and care, I guess he's going to keep sleeping. But I want you to see what happens next. God isn't done with Jonah. He continues to pursue Jonah. This time it's not a storm, it's the captain of the ship. Look at verse 6. The captain then went to him, that is Jonah, and said, hey, how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Translation, what's happening on board is that all the sailors are calling out to their regional gods and nothing's happening. And so he goes below board and says, hey, Jonah, yeah, bro, you just got on our ship. Can you call out to your God? Maybe your God will listen. And isn't it interesting that a non-believing pagan person who doesn't worship the God of Israel is going to a prophet of God and telling him to pray? The juxtapositions throughout Jonah are so stark. When you read it, it's such a mirror to your life and to show that the people who you would think wouldn't care about God were actually informing the prophet of God what he should be doing. You know, when you run from God, God will send people into your life. Just like God sent this captain to go wake up Jonah. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've had people come to me. There may have been times where I was running from God, or maybe just times where I was feeling like I was in neutral, but I wasn't doing what I should be doing, and God used someone to rouse me from either running from God, disobedience, or just not moving in the direction of God that I needed to. See, God in his grace wasn't done with Jonah, just like God in his grace isn't done with you. And some of you may have come in here this morning and you know you've been running from God. You know you've been far from God. Maybe you've been going through a storm in your life and you've been mad at God. Maybe someone's come to you and tried to share Christ with you or encourage you and you've stiff-armed them. But what if you're missing the grace of God in trying to come and reach you? Well, Jonah, you would think, well, surely if the captain's come to him and he's trying to reach them, that surely Jonah's going to wake up now, right? But the captain is desperate. He's like, call on your God. Look at verse 7. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. Because they go to Jonah and all that we can figure out is maybe Jonah woke up, but he doesn't really pray. And so they're trying to figure out, hey, whose fault is this? So they cast lots, which is the equivalent of like shooting dice to figure out where is the problem. At this time, this was how they kind of figured out things. We don't do that today, okay, to figure out things. But in the day, that's what they did. And the lot fell on Jonah. And so then they look at him and they're like, hey, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? I mean, they are trying to figure out, okay, clearly you're the reason we're in this mess. Jonah, you're the reason we're in this storm. What did you do? Who are you? Where did you come from? Because remember, nothing you do affects only you. Jonah's decision, they now realize, has caused the storm that they're in. And so they're asking Jonah, who are you? And I want you to see what Jonah answers, verse 9. He answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and dry land. Now here's what is interesting. The sailors are desperate in trying to figure out who has caused this problem. They come to Jonah for an answer, and he tells them who he is, and he answers correctly. He was a Hebrew. He was a servant of and worshiped the Lord, the God of heaven. And he is correct that his God is the one that made the sea and the dry land. Jonah, his theology was correct, but his heart was far from God. See, some of you maybe grew up in church. You could answer all the Bible questions, but you are far from God like Jonah, and you know it. you've maybe got the right theology. If someone asks you some questions, you'd be able to answer straight up. Yeah, I know all these things. I can name the books of the Bible. I can name who are some of the characters in the Bible. But you're far from God. Jonah answered correctly who he was. But he wasn't living out who it was that he said he was. He was far from God. But he says, yeah, I worship the one true God, the Lord. He made the sea. Translation, yeah, the storm that y'all are trying to pray to your gods, that's not going to work. My God's the one that actually is in charge of all this and could do something about it. He could calm it. Look at what happened to the sailors. Again, look at the juxtaposition between Jonah and these sailors. This terrified them. This terrified who? The sailors. And they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. So these sailors were scared of the storm, but get this, they were more scared of the God who was behind the storm. They were scared of the storm because they knew that they could die, but now they're more afraid and terrified of the God behind it. Yet Jonah was asleep in the bottom of the ship, not fearing God at all. So numb to God, so numb to what God wanted, that he was sleeping on God. But the sailors, they're getting it. They're realizing that if we've prayed to our gods and nothing's happened, but we know that you're responsible for this and your God is the one that could do something, they are now fearful of who this God is, and fearful in a positive sense, fearful in a reverent sense, fearful in a sense of, man, if this is that God, man, I don't want, who is he? Look at verse 11. The sea, we read, was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" I love that. Hey, what should we do to you, Jonah? Like, if this is your God and you know him, like, what should we do to you? Because clearly you're not doing anything about the situation. So they're like, we already asked you to pray, you wouldn't pray. So what should we do to you? Jonah. "Pick me up," Jonah said, "and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it'll become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Now, you all are smart. Like, I believe you all are really smart people. A reasonable person, what do you think a reasonable person would say? Turn the ship around, go back to Joppa, I'll get off at the port, and I will go to Nineveh. Like, anybody with a third grade education and some common sense would know, okay, I caused this. Why did I cause this? Because I disobeyed God, so let me just go back and do what God said. But that's not what Jonah does. He says, "Kill me." He basically said, I'd rather die than obey God. How far has Jonah gone? So far that he would rather die than obey God. So far that he would rather just be thrown into the sea than do what God had asked him to do. He's like, I'd rather just die. Just kill me. Have you ever been that low? Jonah was. Maybe you have. Well, the sailors are like, dude, you are crazy. We ain't going to throw you in. If this is your God, we're not going to try to cross you. And so look at verse 13. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land. It's almost as if they're saying, if you don't want to go back, we want to go back. So we're going to row back to land and do what you should have said that you wanted us to do. But they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. It's almost as if God was not going to let Jonah get off that easy. Because this wasn't about the sailors. Nothing you do affects only you. But this was about Jonah and God. And so, verse 14, then they, the sailors, look at what happens. They cried out to the Lord It should be all caps if you have a translation that you're reading and on the screen. They cried out to the Lord, because this is not their lowercase g gods that they were crying out to anymore. They cried out to the Lord, the one true God, the God of Israel, Jonah's God, the God that they were just introduced to understand that he's the one behind this. Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. They're so nice and gracious. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased. So then, verse 15, they took Jonah and they threw him overboard. And look what happened. The raging sea grew calm. Verse 16. And at this, the men greatly feared the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. What happened to the sailors? They became believers. They became followers of the one true God, of the Lord. How do we know that you're not too far? Man, a bunch of sailors who weren't looking for God, wanted nothing to do with God, had their own lowercase g gods, were encountered by God through a man's disobedience. This rebel named Jonah, who brought a storm on their life through that situation, they were saved into a relationship with God, which is a good reminder that no matter how far you've run, you're never too far from God's grace. These sailors who knew nothing of God, God found them. And Jonah is in the sea, getting ready to die. And you would think by this point, I mean, come on. God is a gracious God, but how gracious are you, God? I mean, come on. You sent a storm to get his attention. That didn't change his heart. You sent the captain to come to him and to challenge him. That didn't change his heart. The sailors are praying and realizing, man, let's try to go back to the land. That doesn't change his heart. And so then he's thrown into the sea to die. And you would think, well, I guess God is done with him. God would have every reason to be done with him, right? But what is grace? Grace is getting something good that you don't deserve. And grace doesn't run out on you because you've gone too far. Amen. Look at verse 17. Jonah floundering about in the ocean as he is getting ready to die. And we read this, verse 17, that now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And you would think, serves him right. He ain't going to drown, but he's going to get eaten. That's one way to go. God got his vindication. I'm done with you, Jonah. I'm going to eat you. And the word there in the original language that's translated here, provided, maybe in other translations it says appointed, because that's really the idea behind it here. God looked at a fish and said, hey, fish, you go do what I'm going to tell you to do. And what did the fish do? The fish obeyed. Again, a juxtaposition between Jonah. God tells Jonah what to do. Jonah doesn't do it. God tells a fish what to do, and the fish does it immediately. God provides a fish to swallow up Jonah, not to kill him, but to save him. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to answer the question, what was Jonah doing for those 3 days and 3 nights? If you love sushi, but what was Jonah doing for 3 days and 3 nights? We're going to answer that question next week. What was God doing when Jonah was in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights? We're going to answer that question next week. But before we go, I just want us to like lean in here. The Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, not to kill him, not to punish him. The fish was God's grace to Jonah. The fish was God scooping up Jonah and preventing him from drowning. The fish was God coming in and scooping him up and saving his life. Maybe right now, you know you've been running from God. You feel like you're in a storm. Maybe right now, you know you've been running from God. And there's been somebody that's tried to talk to you. Maybe it's a mother. Maybe it's a father. Maybe it's your aunt. Maybe it's your uncle. Maybe it's your friend. Maybe it's a mentor. And they've been trying to talk to you and you've just been stiff-arming them. Maybe right now you feel like you're just surrounded by darkness, almost like you're in the belly of a fish. And you're like, God, what are you doing? God, where are you at? God, don't you care? What if you're exactly right now where God wants you? What if you've been getting mad at God's grace in your life? What if you've been running from God and you've had these consequences that have happened, but the reality is, man, if you're still breathing, then God's grace is still active in your life. And he's not done with you. This morning, I just want to challenge all of us in this room, those watching online, man, if you've been running from God, you don't have to keep running. You can throw yourself into the grace of God. This morning, if you've worried that son or that daughter or that father or that mother or that friend or that coworker, if you've worried about them because you've been watching them run and you think maybe they're too far gone, look at the sailors. Those sailors were far from God. Yet God found them. Because he's a gracious God who continues to pursue people like you and like me. So we're getting ready to sing this song. And this song, the lyrics say, run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding. No reason to wait. This morning, if you know you've been running, I just want to challenge you to run to the God of grace who loves you, who didn't just give you a reason to know that he's a God of grace because of what he did in Jonah's life, but gives you a reason to know he's a God of grace because of what he did through his son Jesus on the cross 2,000 years ago. Jesus came for people that were rebels like you and like me. Jesus came for people that have been running from God, and he died on the cross where you deserve to be. He experienced the punishment that we deserved so that we could receive the grace and forgiveness of God. Don't run anymore. Run to the Father. Fall into grace. Be done with the running. Be done with the hiding. And today, there is no reason to wait. We're going to have leaders here at the front that would love to pray with you. If you're like, man, I need someone to pray with, right where you're sitting or standing, you can pray and just call out to God and say, God, I need you. I know I need you. Or this morning, if there's someone in your life that you feel like might be too far, man, would you just commit to pray for them? That they would recognize God's grace in their life and stop running. Let's stand. Let's sing. And you respond as God leads you.